In the previous video, we talked about the activation of cytotoxic T lymphocytes by interleukin IL-2 secreted by the T helper, and the activation of B lymphocytes by interleukin IL-4 secreted by the T helper. In this video, we will explain the fate of the activated cytotoxic T lymphocytes and B lymphocytes. So the T helper coordinates the humoral immunity. The humoral immunity begins with the antigen recognition. It's the first phase. As you can see here, a B lymphocyte can be directly activated by a non-self antigen. An immunocompetent B lymphocyte, when exposed to the antigen, it binds to it via its antibody, and thus the B lymphocyte is activated. Also, the activation of B lymphocyte can be triggered by the T helper. A macrophage can phagocytose the antigen and presents its peptide into MHC class II molecules to a specific T helper. T helper now secrete interleukin IL-4 in order to activate the corresponding B lymphocyte. There is a third case for the activation of B lymphocyte. Once the B lymphocyte binds to the antigen, it internalizes by endocytosis. It digests the antigen and presents its peptides into MHC class II molecules. So the B lymphocytes also have MHC class II molecules expressed on their surface. The peptide associated to MHC class II molecule is presented to a helper T lymphocyte that will secrete interleukin IL-4 and activates the B lymphocyte. So it's the second phase, the activation. Following activation, there is a clonal selection or clonal expansion. The B lymphocyte will divide and form a clone of B lymphocytes which are identical. They have identical antibodies specific for the same antigen. Following the clonal expansion, we have differentiation and finally the effector phase. These B lymphocytes will differentiate into memory cells preserved for many years and into plasma cells secreting circulating antibodies. The antibodies secreted by the plasma cells will neutralize the antigens. It's the effector phase that leads to the elimination of the antigen or the microbe. So we have 5 phases: antigen recognition, activation, clonal expansion, differentiation, and effector phase. Passing now to the coordination of the cell-mediated immunity by the T helper. The first phase is always antigen recognition. A cytotoxic T lymphocyte or CD8 plus having CD8 molecule on its surface binds to an antigen presenting cell via its TCR. The TCR recognizes the non-self peptide associated to MHC class I molecule. So the T8 lymphocyte can be directly activated by the direct contact with an antigen presenting cell. Also, the activation of the T8 cell can be done by the T helper. The T helper will secrete interleukin IL-2. This interleukin will help the T8 cell. Following the activation, the activated T8 cell undergoes a clonal expansion. It multiplies and gives a clone, a group of cytotoxic T lymphocytes which are identical to each other, which have same TCR. Thus, they are specific to the same type of antigen. After the clonal expansion, we have the differentiation phase in which the T8 lymphocytes here will differentiate into memory cells preserved for many years and into effector cytotoxic T lymphocytes that will enter the effector phase, and they will secrete molecules to kill the infected cells or to kill the cancer cells. Also, the molecules secreted by the cytotoxic T lymphocyte will activate macrophages. So we have these 5 phases: antigen recognition, activation either directly by the contact with an APC, or activation via interleukin IL-2 secreted by T helper. In the effector phase, we have cytotoxic T lymphocyte that will lyse or destroy the modified self. We can say that the T helper coordinates both humoral and cell-mediated immune responses. This diagram shows a summary on both immunities, the humoral and the cell-mediated, and their coordination via the T helper. We take the case of a virus. The virus is an intracellular microbe, which means it needs to enter a host cell in order to multiply. The virus can be either directly recognized by the antibody of a B cell. The B cell is activated and differentiates into plasma cells and memory cells. The plasma cells, they secrete circulating antibodies. The antibodies can neutralize the virus before this latter enter the host cell. So the antibodies can prevent the entry of the virus in the host cell. The second case, the virus can infect a host cell or a self cell. It multiplies within the self cell, and the viral antigens or viral peptides are presented on the surface of the infected cell in MHC class I molecules. In this case, a cytotoxic T lymphocyte can directly bind to the infected cell via its TCR and thus proliferates and differentiates into memory cells and into cytotoxic T lymphocytes that release molecules or proteins that can destroy or lyse the infected cells. And also, the virus can be phagocyted by a macrophage, and the viral peptides are presented on the surface of the macrophage, as you can see here in the yellow. So the viral peptides are presented in MHC class II molecules on the surface of the macrophage. This complex MHC class II molecule and viral peptide activates a specific T helper. Now the T helper will release 2 types of cytokines or interleukins: IL-4 that activates a B lymphocyte, and IL-2 that activates a cytotoxic T lymphocyte. Also, T helper will differentiate into memory cells. So in the 3 cases, we have always memory cells to confer future immunity to the same virus. So this diagram summarizes the cooperation existing between the non-specific immune response, whose the effectors are macrophages, and the specific immune responses, the humoral immunity and the cell-mediated immunity. Thanks for listening.